Welcome to Work It, Live It, Own It, where we trade survival mode for strategies that help you thrive in career, life, and everything in between. I'm your hostess, work-life harmony strategist, Sekola Lair. Hey guys, welcome back. And today we're going to go ahead and start off our conversation with a serious question. When was the last time you made a major decision about your career, your family, or your life that was just completely 100% yours? It wasn't influenced by your mother and what she expected. It wasn't shaped by what your peers are doing. It wasn't shaped by what other people are doing on social media, but just yours. And for a lot of women, that question sits like a gut punch because when we actually sit down and examine that question and the choices that we've made in life, we may discover that the ones that we thought were ours had someone else's blueprint and fingerprints all over it. And so today, we're going to talk about a shift that I want to offer you today. And that shift is that you're not behind, you're just on someone else's timeline. And that presents two very different problems along with two different solutions. So welcome back to Work It, Live It, Own It. I am Sekola Lair, work-life harmony strategist. And today we are going to talk about societal timelines versus intentional direction. And when we look at society's timeline, it's really just an invisible schedule that tells us, hey, you should be promoted by now. You should be married. You should have children. Or maybe you should just have it all figured out by now. But most importantly, we're going to talk about what it feels like to forge a different path and finally delete that timeline. And in order to do that, I need to paint a picture for you that I think is going to sound very familiar or feel very familiar to you. So when you think about it, based on society's timeline, whether you're now in your late 30s or maybe you're in your 40s, maybe you have the career, but your personal life doesn't look the way you thought it would. Maybe you have the family, but your career took a detour that you didn't plan for. Maybe you have the career and the family, but you're still waiting to feel like, hey, I finally arrived, because that version of arrived that you thought was supposed to look like and that you were sold looks nothing like what you're actually living right now. And that's totally okay, because underneath it all, when we really pull back and peel back the layers, there is this low grade, persistent hum of us thinking, hey, I should be further along in life by now. And guys, that is exhausting. But I will tell you this, it's not something that you should look at as a personal failure. What it really is the result of spending decades of measuring your life against a timeline that you didn't even sign up for, that wasn't even actually yours in the first place. And so when we look at society's timeline, what it really is a specific, measurable, linear path where it says, hey, by your mid-20s, you should have launched your career. By the time you're 30, you should be in a serious relationship or already married. By the time you're 35, family, that should already be out of the question. You should already know whether you're going to have a family or not. And then by the time you're 40, you should be near or at the peak of your career. And by the time you're in your mid-40s, you should have everything together by now. And you should stop questioning whether you have it together or not. And so if your life doesn't match that sequence, if you have changed careers at 42, maybe you decided to have children later, or you just chose to not have children at all, maybe by the time you're in your 30s or 40s, you had to leave a marriage because it was no longer safe emotionally, physically. There might have been infidelity. Maybe you had to take a step back professionally to take care of a parent. Or, bottom line, it just simply took longer than expected. And you had to take the winding road and path to get there. The timeline tells you somehow that you're behind, that you've missed something, that you didn't do it right. But here's what the timeline never accounts for. It didn't account for a path that is actually designed for your actual life. It was designed, like I said, as a generic, linear, one size fits all version that life has never actually existed for most women. Let's just be honest. There are some of us as women who were not blessed or fortunate to have kids. So our lives look different. Maybe we just haven't met the person that we want to spend the rest of our lives with. It's not from from being open and willing to be in a relationship. It just never happened. Or the career path that we chose to go to pursue in higher education or not choose to, it took a detour. It took a different path, something that was totally unexpected. And you know what? That's reality. That's life. And our lives are complex. It's layered. It's not linear. And what a timeline does is try to steer you on a path the way people think you should go or the way society goes. But listen, a timeline is not a map, it's just a measuring stick. And if you've been letting it measure you your whole entire life, you have to really ask yourself, am I really truly living and am I thriving? So, where does this idea of the timeline come from and why does it have such a hold on us even to today? Even when we know intellectually that the timeline is completely arbitrary, but somehow we feel like we have to measure our lives up against it. The reality is it comes from everywhere all at once. It comes from the questions that relatives ask at family gatherings, such as, so when are you getting promoted? When are you having kids? When are you going to settle down? It comes from peers that you may work with that are hitting major milestones and you start feeling that involuntary comparison. Maybe it comes from you looking at other people's highlight reels on social media when they're not even posting the lowlights of what's happening in their life. They're just showing how life has this perfectly executed plan. It comes from the workplace where there's still this unspoken assumption of how a woman's career trajectory should look a certain way by a certain age. And it works on us because we have become so absorbed. By the time we're old enough, we didn't even take the time to question it. And by the time we're in our 20s and making real decisions, the timeline has already been installed. And it was not a choice, it was there by default. And so this is where prone to power framework comes into play. And the E in prone means empowerment. And empowerment in the context of society's timeline is not about ignoring your circumstances or pretending that external pressures and conflicts don't exist because they do. That's the reality. But what it is about, what empowerment is truly about, is about developing clarity and courage to distinguish between a path that is genuinely yours and a path that you're on because you never stopped to ask whether you chose it or not. And it's also about understanding that life is nonlinear. It's not a failed life, it's a real life. And real lives do not follow predetermined schedules. They just don't. They follow actual human beings living them. So when you think about deleting society's timeline, it doesn't mean that you are completely abandoning your goals. It just means that you're reclaiming the right to pursue them on a schedule that reflects your actual circumstances, your values, and your definition of what a life well lived should feel like and look like for you. So, I want to tell you a story about a woman. We'll just call her Renee. Now, Renee was 40 years old and she spent her 30s building a career in marketing. Great job, steady progression, a title that she was very proud of. And at 38, she made a conscious decision. She thought about it long and hard and she decided not to have children. And it was the right decision for her. She knew deep down she did not want to have children. But at 41, she was sitting across from a career coach who asked her a question. Where do you want to be in 10 years? And Renee at that point went completely blank, not because she didn't have dreams. She had plenty of dreams. She wanted to start her own consulting business. She wanted to travel more. She wanted to write. She even wanted to mentor younger women in her career field. And her life was full of things that she wanted. But the moment that question landed with her, the timeline started to activate. And the timeline said, hey, you're 41. You should have already started your business by now in your 30s. Or you should have had all this figured out already. It's too late to change and pivot now. You've missed the mark. You've missed the window. And so she sat in the chair looking at her career coach with the full weight of a decade. Instead of answering the question, she just said out loud, I think I waited too long. And the coach looked at her for a moment and said, too long for whose timeline? And then Renee told me later that she drove home. She sat in her driveway for 20 minutes. She didn't cry. She just sat there because she realized that she had been measuring her life against a schedule that she had never consciously agreed to. And she was calling herself late to the party that she'd never even been actually invited to. And so Renee, at the age of 42, started her consultant business. And with 18 months, she had more clients that she could handle. It wasn't because she was late. She was exactly on time, her time. And so with that being said, what does it actually look like to delete society's timeline? Because I know some of us are thinking, hey, you know what? This all sounds great, but the pressure is real. The clock is real. How do I actually stop letting society's timeline run my life? And so I want to give you 3 concrete empowerment practices that you can try this month. The first one is audit the should haves. Take out a piece of paper, get your phone, use the memo app, and write down every should have that lives in your head about your career, your relationships, your life, your body, your finances, your family, anything. Write it all down, no filtering, no judgment. And then to next to each one of those should haves, I want you to ask the question, whose voice is this? Is it your voice? Is it your mother's? Is it your industry? Is it your college roommate's highlight reels on social media? Because most of the time, when we trace back the voice of the should haves back to their source, we find out that those should haves don't belong to us at all. And you cannot delete a timeline if you haven't identified whose voice it is or whose expectation it is in the first place. The second empowerment move that you can try is to replace the timeline with a direction, because a timeline is typically going to say, hey, I should be here by the age of whatever. A direction instead is going to say, hey, I'm moving towards Z and I'm doing it in a way that works for me and for my life. And the difference is key. The difference is everything, because a timeline is going to create shame, whereas direction is going to create momentum, because every step forward counts regardless of when you take it. So you pick an area of your life where you've been measuring yourself against the timeline and look at it and reframe it as a direction. And to give you an example, I'm talking about starting a business here. Instead of saying, you know what, I should have started my business by now, instead, a directional move would be, hey, I'm building toward a business and I'm doing it in a way that is sustainable for me. A third empowerment move that you could try is to look for one woman who did it differently, who forged her own path, who rewrote her story. That can be your possibility. So one of the most empowering things that you can do is, when you are trapped in someone else's timeline, is to find evidence to the contrary, that a different path does exist. So find one woman in your life. It could be in a book, a podcast, in your industry, who took the nonlinear approach, who did it and built something real. Now, here's the key to this. When you are looking for an example, this is not the time for you to compare yourself to that person. Instead, I want you to let her existence, her example remind you that the timeline is not the only road. I gave you a story example of Renee, and there are thousands more, and I would love to hear from you. Please put your own journey down in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, because your story could encourage many others. I want you to seek out a woman who forged a path of her own. Be deliberate about it, be intentional. Okay? Let's counteract the timeline scenario. So let's wrap this up. Let's bring it all home. Society's timeline is one of the most effective tools ever invented to keep women small. And it's not because it's malicious, it's because it's invisible. We absorb it so early on in our lives and we become so completely engulfed in it that we mistake it for reality. And we call ourselves late when we are simply different. We call ourselves behind when we're simply human and we're just living life. And we also talked about empowerment in the Prone to Power framework because it's going to ask you something very radical. It's going to ask you to examine a schedule that you have been living, and it's going to ask you to identify which parts are actually yours. And it's going to give yourself permission, real deliberate, unapologetic permission to delete the rest. Bottom line, guys, you're not behind, you're not late, you are not running out of time. You are a woman with a non-linear, real, complex, yet beautiful life. And the only timeline that matters is the one that you consciously choose. And so if this episode resonated with you, I want you to share it with one woman in your life who needs to hear this, because I guarantee you, you know someone who is sitting there with a bunch of should haves going on that does not belong to her. Send this episode to her because it might be the one thing that may change her week, maybe even change her year. And if you want to go a little bit deeper on reclaiming your own path, my book, Harmony Hustle for Women, Master the Art of Thriving in Life and Career, is full of the framework, and it's going to help you do exactly that. The link you can find in the description down below. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode. But in the meantime, keep working it, living it, and owning it in your everyday lives. Take care.